Hello. Today we have with us Neil George, a very storied marketing and business person. Last having been the MD of India and South Asia at Nivea and Abbott Nutrition. Great to have you with us, Neil.
Likewise, thank you for having me here, and thank you for the very eloquent introduction.
Yes. I think the story behind the introduction is going to be a lot more eloquent. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise. Yeah.
Tons and tons of questions to ask you just about our love for marketing. Neil, let me start with a question that I'm sure that every young and mid-level marketing person wants to know from you. You probably hired more CMOs and trained more CMOs in your life than I might have met. Would love to know what you look for in a CMO.
Right. So first, let's start with understanding the role of the CMO in any company. And one thing I realized, having worked in different places and with different companies, is that every CMO job is very unique to an organization's structure, its culture, and their growth strategies. So you cannot have one size fits all for everybody. For instance, there are companies where a lot of the strategies, the innovation, packaging is done centrally. It could be done in Paris, it could be done in London, it could be done in Berlin. And then there are regional hubs that then translate that to the countries. And the role of a marketer in the country is to really make some choices within that and execute that. Similarly, you will have companies that will expect a lot of growth to come from local insights. So it all depends on so first things first is that you cannot have one set of rules for everybody. The second ones are quite obvious. So let's say in consumer marketing, one of the most important elements of what I look for a chief marketing officer is the fundamental role of a chief marketing officer is to deliver incremental demand over and above every other competitor in the market. What I mean by incremental demand is that they need to use all their marketing levers and also combine that with all the other sales levers and other levers available to make sure that your brands, your products are in much greater demand than the competition. Because ultimately the marketeer, the fundamental role is to drive market share profitably. So key element I look out for are, do people have experiences or the skill set to drive demand for the brands, right? And therefore, in your armory, you need to have a nice set of marketing skills and a nice set of sales skills. So in a marketing skills, you need to have very good understanding of consumer, somebody who really understands consumer, who can generate fundamentally beautiful insights, translate their insights into real marketing campaigns, execute those marketing campaigns with the best ROI, and then make sure that they're executed on the ground with excellence. This is what I would call our fundamentals. Then there are skills that they need to know of other functions, because more or less they have to make sure that they execute their marketing strategies on the ground profitably, which means they need to have a good understanding of the commercial value propositions, and they also need to work very closely with the commercial organization that they can be executed brilliantly in the market. So this would be the second set of skill sets that they would do. Then the third one is about stakeholder management, both above, sideways, and downwards. Above is critical, as you know, you're working with the general manager, you're working with regional marketing teams, working with global marketing teams. So you need to be somebody who is very good at stakeholder management. You need to work with the rest of your management team to make sure that you all speak one voice. And then you need to have the capabilities to hire the best people under you with the right sets of skills, the right set of complementary skills that are required for the management, and also work with a number of external agencies that can bring in an outside-in view and bring skill sets that you don't have within. And last but not the least, you should be having a constant hunger for learning. Right? You need to make sure that it's not somebody who says, listen, I've kind of arrived. So every day is a new day, and therefore it should be somebody with very, very good understanding of very good appetite for learning. But besides that, I think a good skill set manual is to look at the PNG manual, which is basically to make sure that you are creative, you've got a lot of initiative and follow through, you've got some strong thinking and problem solving skills, and then you've got lots of interpersonal skills as well.
Sweet. And I also see a lot of, especially in healthcare, so pharma marketing organizations, some of the hospitals and the clinics, they don't always have, CMOs. They have business heads, they have marketing heads for individual businesses, but don't always have a CMO. Any thoughts on that? Do you think as a unified CMO helps, and how does it help?
So one difference you find with healthcare marketing is that a lot of the demand generation happens via the medical webs, right? It happens at the clinic. And therefore, the role of the marketer, the CMO, is to make sure that you understand the patient and the healthcare provider, have the right insights, and therefore you kind of creating the right communication for your sales organization to then go and execute within that. So in that context, the role of the CMO within healthcare organizations sometimes can be diminished, especially in pure play pharma. But I would say in OTC and let's say consumer-oriented pharma companies, I think you need to have skill sets from both sides, where you can understand consumers, you can understand the healthcare professionals, you can understand hospitals, and you can also work very well with your sales organization. And that's why it's a bit different. In pure play consumer, most of the demand levers are kind of, let's say, pulled by the marketing team.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and to add to that, what I also see is that when you do have a CMO, and I think pharma also will gradually move to it, most organizations will move to having that, because when you do have a CMO, you have a unified marketing voice. You have development for different marketing teams, which otherwise gets scattered with different business heads managing marketing, and it scales up the marketing structure of the organization quite quickly. I actually had one consumer marketing organization where I was talking to the CEO, and they instituted internal marketing awards and brand awards for their team. And what he mentioned was very interesting, is that because of these awards, 1 year's award is the next year's hygiene.
Yes.
And the CMO really helps you do some of these elements and institutionalize marketing in that sense.
Yes.
I think it's a good one to start doing in various organizations.
And once you touched upon the other interesting bit is in most healthcare/pharma organizations in India, you're bound to have 200-300 brands. Let's say kind of organized in strategic business unit structure or BU structures. And sometimes the marketeer's role is to kind of raise his or her brand's voice within the sales force much more. So there's a lot of internal competition because the sales force is going and pushing, let's say, 10 brands to the doctor. But the marketer needs to make sure that his or her brand is right on top on the memory list of the sales folks.
And it therefore almost becomes a competition between brand teams.
That's correct.
And it's possible a CMO can, be a deciding factor in terms of
make some priority calls.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
A better way of doing that. Love this conversation. I think the other big thing to talk about is, of course, you worked in roles in almost every continent and in global and regional marketing roles along with an India role. In terms of expectations from Indian marketing teams that a regional or a global marketing team would have in terms of pet peeves, expectations, would love to hear some of that from you.
Right. So the role of the Indian marketing organization has evolved for many companies. So let's take the Unilevers and the Nestles of the world. They've been here for much longer. So the expectations and they're much bigger. Their subsidiaries in India are much bigger, and therefore you expect that there's a level of maturity of the marketeers here, and it's also usually a talent pool from which they hire globally, right? So for large corporations that have been here longer, the expectation is, listen, you help drive a lot of the thinking. In fact, we'll find a lot of the senior marketeers who are sitting in headquarters in regions are actually Indians, right, who've come from the market. The other piece with large corporations is also you've got global brands and you'll also have a number of local brands. So let's take, example like a Glow and Lovely for Unilever, which is a very local brand. Or let's say some of the acquisitions that they've made locally, like a Horlicks, which is a very local brand. So therefore, the marketing thinking is actually kind of influenced by the senior marketeers here. But if you're a company where the Indian subsidiary is still small to mid-sized, the expectation is really high growth. So once you get in there, I can tell you every company out there expects the Indian business to grow at least above the GDP growth rate. Now, our GDP growth rate is about 6-7%. There's not one company that's expecting anything less than 15%, 2x the GDP, right? So if you're a marketer in some of these small emerging mid-sized companies, then you need to have an appetite to say, listen, I need to go after high growth. So that's important. And as always, there'll always be a shortage of funds. So therefore, you have to be creative in terms of how you use the money when you work in these companies. The third one is the most unusual one, which is basically when global companies kind of entering India for the first time. Then a lot of hand-holding will come from the global team. A lot of the people who are being hired have probably no experience, but from a different company from the industry, they would come in, and therefore the expectation would be, hey, you know what, come and transfer some of these skills, learn from headquarters and kind of execute. But otherwise, in general, many of the companies have gone to the model where the strategies are actually crafted at headquarters. And what I meant by strategies is really about the choices that they're making, which categories to play in, which products to look at, what innovation do we look at, what are the packaging standards, what's the global communication standards. So if you look at, it's all driven globally, and therefore the role of the CMO and the marketing team locally is to actually localize that using the local insights. And sometimes it can just be a straightforward translation of the global film, which obviously falls flat, or to work with the global team and say, listen, this insight maybe needs to be tweaked, this packaging needs to be changed, the sizing may need to be different. So the local CMO and the marketing team can actually play a very big role if they can actually really understand the shoppers and the consumers in India and make sure that they're always translating that information all the way back to the people who are actually crafting the strategy. Otherwise, you'll end up strategy that looks great on paper, but on execution in India will actually fall flat.
Makes a lot of sense. And like what you said at the beginning of this conversation, of this question, which is really in terms of the appetite for high growth. And I think the commercial aspects of marketing are often missed out. And the fact that in India the expectations of growth is so big. Very often when we are marketing people at the mid-level and sometimes even at the senior level, we try to guard our budgets to not have very high growths, because we think that when we are guarding those, then it's going to be easier to achieve that. And I think one of the things that I've learned is that the moment you're on the same side as your regional marketing team or your global marketing team, where you're saying, let's look at growth. Let's see how can we achieve the really impressive growth, that ambitious growth that we want to do together. The teams are also happy to support, and the conversation shifts from, this is your target to it shifts from what do you need to achieve that.
So, again, these conversations happen all the time. Part of the problem in the last 5 years has been that a lot of the Western European markets that used to have a steady growth, they've all gone into decline. If you look at beer, if you look at skincare, if you look at home care, they're flat at best. Then within the BRICS nations, China has been on slow growth for many people. Russia, because of the war, which basically means that there are only India, South Africa, and Brazil. Right? And Brazil also has had its challenges. LATAM has, in fact, had the worst couple of years in 2024 and 2025. which therefore puts enormous pressure that there are very few high growth markets like India. And therefore, the discussion is all about this is how do we make sure how we can grow the overall business by asking India to grow even harder. Now, and then the second conversation comes in, you tell us what do you need for us to get this growth. But the fact is, in the last 18 months, the Indian market has also been stagnant. So you can just throw money after India, but the fact is, because of inflation and because of the high level of inflation, the demand in India has also been muted. And that's why the Indian consumer sector in 24 and 25 has gone through this really bad situation where you've got all the global teams saying, listen, you should grow at 15-20%. The demand environment is poor, and the poor marketeers and the sales guys are kind of sandwiched in between.
Makes a lot of sense. And at the same time, it also gives each of us a hat to wear when we are talking to our global and regional counterparts, where we say that, hey, if I kind of support that high growth in whichever way that I can, and I'm a little bit more transparent about the strategies that I can, just wear a slightly different hat. It just smoothens that relationship.
Yeah, except that, most of the time there are levers that you can be pulled. One is to say, listen, let's put more innovation, or let's say put more people, or let's say put more budgets. But each investment on the marketing and sales side will have an equivalent expectation from the top line. So when you're struggling to meet a 8% top line, and like you rightly pointed out earlier, the local teams will always say, hey, you know what, don't give us any more money because we've got enough money. Because any more money, we will just be wasting that to even get the same kind of growth, right? So what you'll do is end up cutting your margins and reducing your profitability, which can be hurting in the future.
That makes a lot of sense. And also kind of to extend that from consumer marketing to healthcare professional communications and marketing. Very often, pharma has a lot of that, but even consumer healthcare brands do have a lot of that. And what happens in that space is that the communication often, the science is the same when you're talking to healthcare professionals, and the communication therefore tends to be same across the world. But there are other levers of marketing growth in terms of patient support programs, patient connects, the connect between the HCP and the patient that one can utilize. And if you're having those right conversations with your global teams, it may not be so much about increased budgets, but it may be about permissions for a very differentiated patient support program for that matter.
Yeah.
Interesting conversations always. I'm going to get into the question that I'm really excited to ask you. I've seen your career, and you're probably one of the few people that have worked in what is traditionally defined as a home care brand, a personal care brand, and a consumer healthcare brand, even a nutrition brand. I haven't seen anyone else working across so many different kinds of brands. So, just the learnings on that in terms of marketing, how do you see it differently? Would love to have a few conversations on that.
So, in each of these, there are some common stakeholders that you need to work with, and then there are some unique ones in which you work with separately in healthcare. So let's say in home care and skin care, you're typically working with the consumers, the shoppers, and retailers. So probably if you get this ecosystem done, then you have a good chance of success. If you come to skin care, then you have also starting to have beauty influencers. We're talking about dermatologists that play into the game a little bit. And then when you come to healthcare, then you need to really understand your healthcare providers, your doctors and your specialists, and also the hospitals, because that's starting to become a big part of the healthcare sales. So some things are common, but from an insight standpoint, you need to make sure that you need to wear different hats as you manage this. Second, I think it's kind of an established thought, which I believe should be changed, is that healthcare communication and what we talk should be always all the time scientific, which I think is great. But often what happens is you lack the understanding and only then can you build the science on top of that. So one thing I always encourage people in healthcare is to make sure that you deeply understand your patients. That's very, very important. The end person who's actually using that. You're talking about in some cases, the end patient can be somebody who cannot talk, like a little baby, or it could be a patient in the last few years of their lives, and they can't express that well. So therefore, you then often have to work with the caregivers, like a nurse or a new mom who will then understand the science of it. So it's critical that you understand the entire cycle in each of these sectors, and that really helps. In general, and as always, there are exceptions. I think the healthcare space, OTC space, is highly regulated because you're obviously making health claims, and one therefore, because of the regulatory environment, the amount of risk taking that the companies are willing to take, there is the holding back as compared to beauty and home care. There you are much more, you'll be controlled by your advertising associations or your competition. But here, your first area or the Lakshman Rekha that you need to cross is with your own legal and your regulatory folks. So automatically, you will find that a lot of the marketing blunt, the sharp edges are actually kind of smoothened out before it actually goes to the next rounds, which, funnily enough, in home care and beauty care, doesn't happen that often. So that's the other differences that you will find. And the third one is many a time it's the seriousness of the problem, right? So let's say in home care, you're basically talking about washing your hands, or cleaning the floors, freshening the air, and lots of times people are willing to make a choice and say, listen, I can do that with something else, and I can light a candle instead of putting an air freshener. But in healthcare, sometimes these are life-saving drugs, and sometimes you cannot walk away from that, right? So the seriousness matters, and therefore you need to have the right level of appropriate communication modes to ensure that your patients and your influencers get the message properly. I think these will be some of the reflections that I have across these categories.
Yeah. No, and a lot of it makes it is a perspective that can change the way one looks at marketing in that sense. I also missed mentioning this, that some of the brands that you worked on in each of these categories are the leading brands in the world in these categories, and would love for you to pick up examples to illustrate some of the points that you spoke about. And especially what was interesting is this whole space of that you've got multiple stakeholders in every category, and more so that's the new marketing, where the number of stakeholders is going up exponentially from when we started the careers to where we are now. And to look at the insighting for each of these stakeholders differently, but at the heart of every insight is still the patient or the consumer. I really loved how you said that. It would be amazing if you could bring that alive for our audience.
Sure. So I'll not take brand names, but I'll tell you'll kind of guess when I talk to you about this. So in the Indian market, you have typically what they call coughs and colds medications, and that can go all the way from rubs, balms, all the way to tablets, to liquids, sometimes injections. It can go the entire spectrum. But in consumer OTC, long time ago, one of the biggest, so when you have a cold, the common cold, it usually it takes about somewhere between 3 and 7 days, and it goes through the cycle. And all you can do in cough and cold medications is manage the symptoms. You'll never get complete cure. There's no cure for common cold, right? You just only get relief from the symptoms. In India, the top 2 symptoms were always, and it continues to be, and the top three, if I may, will always be headache, and that's usually the first symptom of a common cold. You'll have a sore throat, and then you'll have a blocked nose, or you'll have a running nose, and then you'll have a cough. So that's kind of the four main. So some time ago, one of the companies that I used to work with, they figured out that Indian adults, they just take a headache tablet when they have a common cold. And why is that? Because that's the first symptom that comes along. But and then from day 2, 3, and 4, when your other symptoms start kicking in, you continue to be dreary and tired because you have a running nose and you have a cough. So this company then realized that there's probably an opportunity to have a multi-symptomatic relief tablet, and they launched a particular product which said, listen, did you know that you're actually taking just a headache tablet for your cold? In fact, what you should be taking is something that can provide relief from headache as well as your blocked nose. And that brand continues to, on that strategy, grow significantly.
I remember we grew up on that piece of advertising, seeing it on old.
So I worked on this campaign back in '96, and I think even today, I see that it's an absolutely relevant insight from a patient standpoint.
I remember seeing this campaign first when I was seeing Bagle Ki Duniya.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one example of when you understand a patient piece really well. The other one, when you understand the doctor's piece very well, is that a well-known the dental product. They'll always say it's the number one used and recommended product by the dentist in India, right? And that's an insight where the professional provides a positive rub-off for the usage of a daily use product. Okay, so therefore the professional becomes very important. The third one that I would think about is in more recent care is basically in hospital care. So when you go into an ICU or when you go into a ward, there's lots of nutrition, and in most hospitals in India, the primary form of nutrition is actually what they call as blended food that comes from the hospital canteen, because somebody in an ICU is not able to have solid food. But so the insights are, when you give this solid food, one, there's a lot of wastage. Second, it's unhygienic, and it's very inconvenient for a nurse because he or she will have to stand and actually feed it to the person. So one of the big insightings that companies do is how do you then move into more professional liquid nutrition for patients in ward and in the ICU. That's again when you understand your hospital protocols a little bit better. So one of the things that actually it helps once you have a liquid diet to a patient is that the nurse at night will have extra time to manage more patients, which makes the hospital a lot more productive, and therefore they will take up your products, right? So that's the other case in which you've looked at a stakeholder and then manage that. Another important one, which a lot of marketeers often oversee, and is a good advice I would give to all my general managers in the OTC space, is look at how much of time does a medical rep spend inside the cubicle, right? If you look at the average space, in a typical day in India, a medical rep would typically do about 10 to 12 doctors in a day. And that you're talking about an 8 to 9 hour day. So think of it, you're in a 540 minutes, 9 times 60, you're spending 12 times 1 minute. So you're spending 12 minutes out of your 540 minutes of work just meeting, and then there's a lot of waiting time, etc. Right? So it's therefore critical for a marketer to understand that, listen, there is very limited time inside a doctor's cabin, and therefore the opening of your communication, what you really want to focus on, and how do you engage the doctor with the right insights, and make sure that this 1 minute goes to 2 minutes to 3 minutes is critical. And that's, you can only understand if you actually work with your medical reps and understand how they actually show their iPad to the doctor. Right? So these are all insights where you get from different stakeholders in the system and make sure that you get a better marketing and sales program out.
I love that you said the last example, in fact, because and I think just as an outside-in perspective, it's beautiful because I always talk about the fact that we are probably, it's the most inefficient marketing channel in the world, or most inefficient job in the world, where you only get 12 minutes of efficient time where you're actually talking to a doctor, to influence the doctor, but you spend 540 minutes that particular day. And if we recognize that and we say, okay, but let's use that as a fulcrum for my relationship, and what can I do outside the chamber that connects back to that conversation? What more can I do? It can be very, very, it can change the way one looks at healthcare professionals.
And that's when data mining and data management, your CRM, comes into play, because you know exactly, if I'm going into this doctor, I know exactly whether he or she is actually recommending our products, what were his or her barriers to recommending our products. So when you go and you're well prepared, and you don't just put in the same communication for all doctors, that each doctor will have a unique communication to start and you become a lot more productive. You have conversations much longer with the doctor, and therefore your time spent inside the cabin gets a little bit more.
And as marketing folks, you segment the communication.
Exactly.
For your medical reps, so you break it down in a way that they can cover it easily, and therefore you take the larger global strategy that we were talking about earlier, and you break it down into smaller pieces that are suitable for the Indian market.
Absolutely.
Without necessarily changing the strategy at that top line level.
Absolutely.
Very interesting conversations. The other thing that we started off this particular leg of the conversation on was the different categories: home care, personal care, skin care, healthcare. And very often, one hears in healthcare marketing that healthcare marketing is not like that. It's too regulated, or it's got you need to be more functional, as one of the points that you spoke about. And what people fail to realize is that the consumer is exactly the same. It's the same consumer who's using a skincare product or a home care product or a personal care product or a healthcare product, and therefore the conversation and the inciting needs to come from the exact same spaces. So, if you could talk a little bit more about that, Mike.
Yep. So, let's look at new to the world categories. I still think flu vaccinations in India are a relatively new category relative to Western Europe, or let's say some of the Southeast Asian markets. And you'll often find that part of the reason is that people are just not aware that there is a flu vaccination, right? So there, it's a classic funnel challenge where you figure out, listen, it's an awareness challenge. Therefore, you need a celebrity or somebody who brings in the gravitas to talk about, let's say, this particular problem. Okay, so now if you ask me, diabetes as a problem is very well known because it's now been kind of touted for very long by different companies. So that's important. So you will find that for new to world categories, it's very important to understand the barriers to why they are not using that. Okay. The other one you'll also find is you'll to understand from doctors why they are recommending a specific brand and not the other. So, for instance, we've seen countless examples in India, and I can even tell you of a recent example of a very popular and growing skincare brand that's dermatologist recommended. Is that the healthcare professionals absolutely detest when a doctor only recommended brand becomes also nationally advertised on television, and it's also available outside of chemists, and it's available in supermarkets and regular channels. And one of the things we must recognize in India, both with doctors as well as the chemists and pharmacists, is that they bring in a level of expertise. And they're not commercial really. Many of them are not commercial as opposed to popular belief, but they want to maintain their level of the fact that they're experts in front of their shoppers and in front of their patients. The minute that you actually hit on that particular issue, that insight, you will lose them. And what I'm told is that in this particular case, this particular brand, I've seen actually dermatologists actually pull out because they used to recommend that, and they say, listen, you know what? The one that I recommend now, it's also in advertising, it's also available in all the stores. People say, hey, why the heck should I come to a doctor, right? Yeah. Is that classic case of, when you're actually being charged 500,000 or 1,500 bucks, and you get a tablet, which is advertised on television for 10 rupees. You say, what the heck? Why did I spend 1,500? I could have done it anymore. Otherwise. So I think it's critical to understand these insights as well in healthcare, which again sometimes a lot of marketeers absolutely forget and take the brands down a different path.
Absolutely, and which gets us back to the earlier piece you spoke about, which is that each stakeholder has their own insight, but very often connected to the consumer or the patient insight.
Yeah.
So in the derma, we had at one point of time this sun protection brand that was also reaching out to dermatologists, and a very well-known brand which I will not mention. And we said, if we go to doctors with sun protection as a category, then derms are not going to want to, they don't care about this category. So they don't want to know about when they will prescribe or recommend this particular category. So we said, okay, studied the doctor a little bit more, and we realized that at that point of time, I'm talking about 8 to 9 years back, dermat procedures were growing. And glycolic peels and dermabrasions and the constant prescription or recommendation with any of these procedures was about a month or two of care from the sun. Including a sun protection cream. And so the moment the conversation and the prescription or the recommendation occasion became connected to post-procedural care versus just sun protection, it became a conversation the doctor was very happy to be a part of. And still, at the end of it, it was something that the consumer was still definitely a big part of that insight. It was something that was relevant, but it changed for that particular stakeholder. So I think this wearing the hats that we've spoken about at different points of time are something which is very, very helpful.
Yeah. And the other bit that you will pick up in India is that even within each specialty group, there is a north, south, east, west divide. Okay, so there are the big doctors who come from the north, and there are big doctors who come from Bombay, or the big doctors who come from Chennai, big doctors from Calcutta, and each of these groups, even within the same kind of sector of the OTC industry, have got different biases and have got different, let's say, programs that they want to drive. So for instance, one group in the diabetes might say, listen, let's go for much more of checkups, right? Blood checkups. The other one say, listen, no, our focus is much more on nutrition. The third group might say, listen, it's all about lifestyle. And the fourth one will say, no, let's absolutely go after all these new Manjaros and the weight loss drugs for the. It's the same group, the same sort of diabetologists, but all of them will end up having this. So it's very critical for you to understand, where you're playing, and in fact, the same company playing in India may have to play to 4 different subgroups. I often find this in India, where some of the more senior professionals, they have their own agendas, and all good ones. I would say there's nothing wrong. All of them have their agendas, but it's critical for you to understand from the industry bodies what are they going after.
Especially when you're using them as key opinion leaders and
Correct.
cascading the behavior down, hopefully.
Correct.
Incredible conversations, and I'm not going to let you go without talking about your book. You're one of the few marketing professionals from the industry that has written a book on branding and marketing. Do talk to us about that, your learnings from that.
Yeah. So, the book is called Building the Perfect Beast, what really happens in brand management. And it's not a book, it's actually a comic. It's a manga comic, 124 plus pages. And it basically captures the life of these 6 interns in a multinational corporation set in London and their very first year of their internship from end to end. So that's basically the story. And the fundamental philosophy of this book is all about, when you join organizations when you're young, you basically start as this really nice teddy bears, nice out of campuses, out of business schools. You're naive, you're soft, you're honest. And then as time passes, you'll find that you're actually building yourself into the perfect beast. So it's like moving from a rabbit into a wolf over time. And that's basically kind of captured in that book. It was self-published when I first started. And then the HarperCollins folks, they were at a conference when they listened to me speak about the book. Then they have signed me up. So I'm an official HarperCollins author. And and I use that book to actually speak to students, speak to people in the industry about what really happens in brand management. So I hope some of your viewers and some of your readers pick up a book. It's available on most online bookshops.
I think it's a must-buy. I'm going to read it cover to cover. Just a very, very interesting premise, and the journey that each of us as marketing folks have gone through. So would love to do that. But thank you for your time today and the deep insights that you shared with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and all the best to all your readers and everybody listening to me and reading about us. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Thanks, Neil. Look forward to keeping it. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Bye-bye.